I did want to begin with the new CDC guidance around isolation, cutting the time for COVID positives to 5 days from 10. Obviously, a huge issue for business as they try to get people back to work. And I've listened to some of your interviews and the CDC director's interviews about why this decision was made. And I still think there's some confusion and questions that I was hoping you could address, Dr. Fauci, about whether this decision was made based on the medical research, the studies, the science, and keeping people safe.
Well, certainly that's the primary reason why you make any decision related to public health. The CDC decision was made on the basis of the fact that when you have an asymptomatic person, the standard prior recommendation or guideline was to keep people isolated for 10 days. When you're dealing now with an outbreak where the volume of new cases is very disruptive of society, you just gave a moment ago showing that about 30% of the New York City fire force is out sick, that we need to keep society running in the sense of there are many other deleterious effects, health-wise effects, if society is crippled in the sense of being functioning to keeping critical things going. So in order to address that, they looked for a balance between what is safe and scientifically based and what could get us to keep society running. And it was felt that if you look at the likelihood of there being spread of infection from an infected person in the first 5 days is much, much more risky as you get into the second half of the 10-day period, day 6, 7, 8, 9, the chances of transmitting is very, very low. And for that reason, the decision was made to strike a balance. Keep people isolated for 5 days, and if they remain without symptoms, to go back to their normal function with the absolute requirement of wearing a mask at all times for those second 5 days of the 10-day framework.
And not have to take a test. And I know there's been a lot of criticism, and a lot of health professionals, Dr. Fauci, have come out and said it should have included a negative test after that 5th day. And I know you addressed that the antigen tests, we just don't know how accurate or precise they are after 5 days. But would you feel comfortable sitting next to someone in a meeting that after 5 days still tests positive on a rapid antigen test for COVID?
You know, nothing is risk-free when you're dealing with COVID, but the risk is extremely low. And as the CDC director said at the press conference today, if you look at the predictive value that you might act on a result, it is not a predictive value that you can act on, because if it's negative, it doesn't really necessarily tell you whether you're transmissible or not. And if it's positive, we don't know what that means for transmissibility. So if the end game is to prevent transmissibility in that second half of the 10-day period, wearing a mask consistently is the best way to do that.
You mentioned the CDC director there, Dr. Fauci. I mean, Dr. Walensky also said that the shortening of the quarantine period, quote, really had a lot to do with what we thought people would be able to tolerate, end quote. Was that comment a mistake? Does it suggest that you're no longer being guided just by the science?
No, what Dr. Walensky was referring to is that when you want to get effectiveness of a particular intervention, there are a lot of considerations. You always make science the major driving force, but you have to have a situation where people will be doing what it is, what you want them to do and what's best for them. So science is always the dominant driving force, but she was referring to other considerations, such as many people, even when they know they're infected, don't isolate. So what she was saying, let's have a balance of making sure the science is solid, but something that people will be able to implement. That's what she was referring to.
Switching focus a little bit, Dr. Fauci, I wondered whether you felt there had been a communication error from government officials throughout this pandemic by suggesting initially that the primary reason to get vaccinated was to prevent you getting COVID at all, as opposed to reducing the severity if you do or when you do catch it. And whether we're now in rather an awkward position, given that earlier comms, that so many people are catching COVID, whether they've been, if they have already received a vaccine, even if they've received the booster, it kind of puts quite an awkward spin on things now.
Well, I think it was the question of what people interpreted. If you looked at the clinical trial, the tens of thousands of people in the original clinical trials, for example, with Moderna and Pfizer, the primary endpoint that led to the 94 and 95% efficacy in those trials was prevention of symptomatic disease, not prevention of infection. So although you're absolutely correct, there was a lot of people understandably felt that I'm not going to get infected at all. The primary reason is to prevent you from getting symptomatic disease, but importantly, to prevent you from getting serious disease. Now, that could have been done better communicating to the public, I admit, but that is where we stand. The goal is to make sure people don't get sick. Getting a positive test and being asymptomatic, so long as you don't spread it to someone else, is a reasonably good outcome of getting vaccinated where you don't get sick.